Hello and welcome. I'm Bart Poulson, and this is the Data is for Doing live office hours. And I have with me today a special guest, my sister Lisa Poulson, who will introduce herself in a minute. And we are here to talk about our shared interest in communicating data effectively. Now, for those of you who are here live, and we saw that people have clicked in from around the world, thank you so much. If you are here and you're live, we invite you to add a comment to say hello and tell us where you are. I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the Western United States. Lisa's in San Francisco. And as a reminder, this event is also being recorded and will be available immediately afterwards on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on Facebook, where people can access it and you can share it with others. Anyhow, we're going to talk about communicating in data and knowing your audience. But first, I want to invite Lisa to introduce herself a little bit more.
Hi, I'm Lisa Poulson. I am Bart's older sister, and turns out we work sometimes in adjacent ways. I'm a communications coach, and so I'm helping people learn how to communicate big ideas, sometimes big data, sometimes big stories. And Bart and I wrote newsletters that were bizarrely adjacent to each other just this last couple of weeks, right?
Yep, mine was about knowing, what really was about egocentrism and the idea that, which is a psychological concept different from being a self-centered person. It's a developmental thing where young people assume that other people know what they know, see what they see, and think and interpret things the same way that they do. And it can cause problems when you're presenting your data, because you imagine if you show people a data table or a graph, they will understand it the same way that you do.
They don't even know what a regression analysis is half the time.
And then just yesterday, you published yours. If you were to look in the comments, I have both Lisa's LinkedIn profile at linkedin.com/in/Lisa Poulson, as well as a link to her newsletter that just got published yesterday.
So, Bart, the thing that I really enjoyed about reading your newsletter is just these examples of what egocentrism looks like. So take us through a couple of those, because some of them reminded me of tech founders. And I mean that in the nicest possible way.
Okay, I'll give you a simple one. One that I did not describe in the but that comes up all the time in my teaching. There are two words that so frequently get misinterpreted when I talk about data. Number one is correlation. Mm-hmm. And correlation means that there's a statistical association. And there's no debate about whether there is a correlation. Different methods will give you different numbers, but you say, I used this method, I got this number, it's there. That really is not to be argued with. But what people argue about is the interpretation, because a lot of people jump immediately ahead to a cause and effect relationship between the two things that are correlated. It makes sense. People who go to this private school do better on this standardized test, and the immediate assumption is, well, it's because this private school teaches better and you do better on the standardized test. And we go like, oh my goodness, there are so many confounded variables that can explain that. And, the very first thing you're going to have to do is control for the parent's socioeconomic status. Mm-hmm. Another one is just the term statistical significance. And what that means is that the effect you found in your data has a non-zero probability of occurring if the null hypothesis is true. The idea is this is not something that's likely to be a fluke, mm-hmm. Or it's not something that happens very often by chance when there's nothing going on. But the problem is when you say the word significant, people always immediately think that means big and important and meaningful. And researchers have to spend their whole life saying like, no. It just means it's got a low probability of being a fluke.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's language. This is one of the things I think is such a hard thing for anybody who works in any field that's complicated, is the language that we use that's completely normal vocabulary to us is foreign to other people. So we're always it's always important to recognize where your language is different and not to assume that everyone infers all of the same meaning that you would infer. But talk to me about, I like the example about the shoes, the little kid with the shoes. So tell us.
Yeah, so this is one from the introductory psych class that I teach. Mm-hmm. And the idea is you get a young child who has some new shoes, and this child is talking on the telephone on voice call with their grandparents, and they're talking for a minute or two, and then they become irritated that their grandparents have not commented on their wonderful new shoes, which obviously they don't know that they purchased, and they can't see them because it's a voice call. And this example comes from back in the day of landlines. Mm-hmm. But like, I see something and I know something. Why can't you see it? And so that's a good one. And there's also really obvious things. I also give the examples of simply, if you're talking about right or left side, do you mean my left or your left?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it turns out that even surgeons confuse that over 1,000 times a year in the United States, which is why they have to use Sharpies and draw on the patient's body beforehand, cut here.
Well, when I read the thing about the shoes, it's like, why don't you see what I see? Why don't you understand what I understand? And one of the things we are always talking about in technology is overcoming the failure of imagination. So
that's a neat concept, but explain more.
Okay, so you see something super clearly and you don't understand why other people can't see it. And it's just because they don't have the same frame of reference. They haven't imagined or thought about the things that you've thought about. And so you're like, why can't everyone see my shoes? Why doesn't everyone think my shoes are cool? And no one else even realizes that the shoes are there. So in a way, you can be egocentric if you don't comprehend that other people don't see what you see.
And the same thing happens, I think, when people are presenting the results of their data analyses to their stakeholders. They show a graph or a table, and in their minds, they're kind of going, duh, it's totally obvious. I should not have to even explain this. Are you idiots?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can't you see that there's a slight deviation right here? That I can't believe I have to figure this out.
Yes. Well, and you've got to know who your audience is. And I had these 4 points in my newsletter. Oh, should we pop up my beautiful slides so we can look at the 4 points?
We have 2 slides to share. Here they come.
First, let's talk about, just these quotes. All of these quotes kind of say the same thing in a different.
All right, let's go through them one at a time.
Okay, so Lee Atwater was a famous political consultant who had kind of a dicey reputation, but he's like, it doesn't matter what the truth is. What matters is what people think. So the baseline where you have to start is where people think and what they perceive, whether or not it's true. And I've worked with a lot of organizations where they're not doing the bad thing people think they're doing. And so they just can't understand why they should address it at all. But they need to because the perception exists. So for people who are working with data, it's like you were talking about statistically significant. There's a perception that means that this is massive. So when you're talking about data, where are there places where people have these perceptions and you have to deal with them, that's their reality when you're trying to communicate with them as a data scientist?
I'll mention one other thing that goes into this, and that is anytime you bring out numbers and you have a graph, people take it as just like etched in stone truth.
Yeah.
This is the way it is. And you go, oh my goodness, 1,000 judgment calls went in to how the study was designed, how the data was gathered, and influencing who we got data from and where there were glitches and what was going on. And there are so many things that influence this. You got to, the joke, my field is social psychology, and the joke about research psychology is just like trying to nail Jello to the wall. It's just all flipping all over the place. You can get very useful things done, but you're working with something that is inherently very squishy and flexible.
Yeah. Like the concept of reality or objectivity. Like there is no one objective reality. Then this second one, so Vinod Khosla is a famous venture capitalist, and he was a founder. He's one of the big OG Silicon Valley guys. And I like this one because he's saying it doesn't matter what you say. Because if the people don't hear you or understand you, you have failed. So you could have an absolutely brilliant presentation and still completely fail as a communicator. And I think the correlation there, is it a correlation? The analog there is putting up the charts and the graphs. Behold my charts and graphs. Your charts and graphs aren't going to communicate anything if people don't understand them.
No. And then that leads into the third one from George Bernard Shaw, the playwright.
Yes. This is my favorite one. It's like, don't assume anyone understands you. You can be deluded and think that you've communicated and that everyone gets it, but they probably don't.
There's a little off the side from that. Once upon a time, I did a major study for a global organization on evaluating the effectiveness of a media program they were doing. And they had this funnel where they were looking at many different outcomes until they finally got to this one really big commitment, one from the people they were trying to reach. And we found out that 50% of the people who on a telephone survey said yes to this last final outcome, 50% were mistaken. We were able to do that because, we had this bizarre set of associations. They said yes over here, but none of their other responses make sense to that. And there was a way to confirm whether what they said was accurate. And a full 50% were inaccurate on the most critical outcome of this particular study. And, the problem also is this is a study that this organization did, I think every other year for a very long time. And it suddenly said like, oh, shoot, now what do we think about any of the other ones?
Yeah.
And so the problem, of course, is the question was not ambiguous. The question was crystal clear, but people had to be paying attention.
Yeah.
To get the whole thing. The actual phrase there, if you actually paid attention to the entire sentence, there was no room for confusion, but it was a telephone survey and it was really long and people were not paying attention.
Yeah.
And so we thought we had this communication and we thought we had solid data and we didn't.
Yeah. Well, you're setting up the next slide. Let's look at the next one and what the 4 things are that you can actually do. So when you are trying to communicate an idea to someone else, you're trying to build a bridge from what's in your head to what's in their head. And the most important thing is to just accept that that's what you're doing, that you have to do that. That people don't believe and see and feel the same things you believe and see and feel. Even if they're your own employees, they might not. Second thing is, well, maybe we should find out if there's any data, what does our audience see and believe and feel? Depending on who you're talking to, maybe you can read stuff they've written. Social media exists. There are lots of places to see what people have said and get a sense, where is this person? What are they paying attention to? What do they think about? Do I think that they might understand what I'm trying to say? But this gets to the third thing, observing your audience. So when you are actually communicating with people, what are they doing? Are they looking down at whatever pieces of paper that are in front of them and doodling? Are they looking mystified? Do they ask questions that are completely orthogonal so that it's clear that they don't understand anything you said? And you should not assume you ever have more than maybe at the best 30 to 50% of someone's attention.
That's interesting.
Which is why you have to repeat yourself way more than you think is necessary, way more often, even to your own employees, your own team. Even if you're a 15-person startup and you think everyone is completely aligned and we all know exactly what you're doing, you still have to repeat yourself over and over and over again. And Bart, we didn't talk about doing this, but how do you do these 4 things when you're presenting data to people? How do you How do you
You
accept
know,
people are different and learn where they
let
are?
me come back to the slide here because I was laughing because it reminds me of when I teach my statistics class.
Let's
Um,
talk about that.
okay, accept reality. Number one is, so when I'm teaching at my university job, um, I'm teaching a required course, third-year course in statistics for the behavioral sciences. I teach about 800 students a year, and the first thing is for me to know that none of them want to be there. Nobody went into the behavioral sciences so they could take a statistics class.
Right.
And so basically everybody, a lot of them are just terrified.
Mhm.
They keep saying like, I'm horrible at math. And I have to keep saying, this isn't a math class. Yes, we have numbers and there are a small number of formulas in it, but fundamentally this is a class about understanding people, but they see numbers
Yeah.
and it's really scary for them.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, nobody's taking it voluntarily.
Yeah.
And so, I make a joke about it, say, kind of, it's like I'm giving colonoscopies. And the best I can hope for is that people say it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. But
Uh-huh.
learning about your audience, I do have my people introduce themselves and I ask them what they're studying because my class is interdisciplinary. We have people from many different majors in it. And I ask them what they're planning on doing when they get out of college. And a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are planning on going to graduate school. But most of those are trying to become not research psychologists like me, but they're trying to become either licensed clinical social workers or marriage and family therapists or clinical mental health counselors. A lot of them also want to open up their own business. And a lot of them just want to go be done with school and they want to be with their family or, they have other plans. So I do get some information about them. And then observe your audience. And well, when I teach in person, man, everybody's got their computer out and I can tell, okay, they are on Facebook, they're on TikTok, they're on doing something else. But the idea of repeat yourself, I do that. Now in class, I'll say things a couple of times and I will review stuff because obviously somebody was on TikTok and they weren't paying attention and they need me to start over again. But I teach it live in class. I also prepared the presentations. I also created videos of the same presentations that they can look at whenever they can. And I wrote a textbook that has the same information that's in the textbook and the videos. And then I have these quiz review videos. And so I really present the same information in about 5 times in 5 different modalities.
Mm-hmm.
And the feedback I've gotten from the students is that has been really, really important to them. And I know it's because a lot of times, it's going to take them a while to realize that they actually need to know some of this material. So, but that's different. I'm talking about an academic setting. On the other hand, maybe you've got an example from your consulting work.
One of the things, so I've done a lot of work, I can't say for which clients, I've done a lot of work with litigators. So for corporations that are facing big federal lawsuits or hearings, and the accept reality part is really hard, both for the executives who are going to be sitting up on the stand and for the litigators who are used to controlling every last element of the process that they have to. And so the people who are going to be sitting on the stand always think, well, I'm a wonderful, great person who made good choices. I didn't do anything wrong. And then they have to get ready for cross-examination and a bunch of really nasty questions. And so just accepting that they have to demonstrate that their reality deserves to be heard. And then for litigators, which I think is hilarious, thinking that they can control how the media is going to react to what was said in the courtroom. So when I was a PR person, no, I don't want the reporters to write that. I want them to write this. I'm like, sorry. So that was another place where they had to accept the reality of how media relations works. And then learning about my audience, for me as a PR person, if I'm in the middle of litigation, the litigators would always say, we have an audience of one. It's the federal judge. No one else matters. But I'm the PR person. All of the audiences matter to me. And so what I had to do was accept the reality that my audience didn't care about 90% of what I was responsible for.
Let me just ask, I'm going to assume that there have been situations where a company has sort of won the legal battle, but lost the PR battle.
That happens all the time.
Yeah.
That happens all the time. I mean, this is not a situation I was involved in, but you look at the hearings, when the presidents of Harvard and Penn lost their jobs.
That's right.
They properly parsed the legal arguments, and their legal statements were correct according to their policies and the law. And they got excoriated because they weren't addressing feeling and they didn't sound human. So there can be also a huge delta there between the reality that we perceive and the larger reality that we forget that we have to pay attention to. Because very often when we're communicating, and I know this is also true in a corporate setting, you prepare your slide deck, you don't know who's going to email it to whom. You don't know what that person's going to think about it and what they're going to say and how they'll misinterpret it. I have a friend who she's an epidemiologist. She's working at Genentech. And she put together some numbers regarding a drug for treating eyes. And the marketing team she got the presentation back and every number was doubled. And she asked the marketing team and they're like, well, people have two eyes. And she's like, do you? Oh my goodness, I didn't know that people have two eyes. I never occurred to me to include that in my data. But that's the kind of stuff that can happen.
Okay, speaking of data presentations gone wrong, that's going to be kind of at the top of the list.
Right?
When somebody magically multiplies all your numbers by 2.
Right, exactly. So, that's a marketing person who's super excited and wants to make things look good and just assumes without checking in with anybody that obviously that you as the data person hadn't realized that you should be thinking about both eyeballs and not one eyeball. I mean, that's an extreme example, but that kind of stuff happens. Smaller versions of that happen every day.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of people really don't want to face the reality that you see. So sometimes you have data and it's not a happy story. And getting people to accept that slightly unhappy story or majorly unhappy story really is a communications challenge too.
It reminds me, so since we were talking about this, I got a family member who tested positive for COVID for the 3rd time in the last hour or 2. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of early in the pandemic, people giving these impossibly cherry-picked statistics.
Yeah.
The one was like, well, the percentage of tests that are positive has gone down. And you go like, yeah, but the number of tests that have been conducted has changed also. Right. And you say like, you can't give a ratio without also addressing the base rates.
Well, if you don't want people to understand what's really going on.
Yeah, there is that.
Yeah. So I mean,
deliberate obfuscation.
Yeah, it gets back to the perception and reality thing, like playing with the perception to create an alternate reality. Mm-hmm. It does get to that. So I guess coming up, what are our lessons, B?
So the first and important one, I think, is to understand that your audience, which might be your stakeholders, maybe people who hired you to do an analysis, or the people to whom you are reporting, or the other people with whom they may be sharing things. Mm-hmm. They may see things differently than you do. And so I know, for instance, you got to be very careful about assumptions, not just cultural assumptions, though those are really big, but you have to make assumptions about whether they even have the same values that you do. You might be trying to say, hey, look, we've got a better product. We've developed a better product. Isn't that great? And their question is it more profitable?
Yeah.
And you go, oh, we didn't even look into that. Mm-hmm. Where you've got this complete mismatch.
Right.
And truthfully, in data analysis, it happens all the time where you say, we have found a subgroup that is small, but we have really big impact. We got a high response rate with this subgroup. And the question is, all right, that's nice, but they're only like 10 or 20% of the total audience. We got a good response with them. Are we willing to just, focus on this one niche group? Is that now, if it costs money to address the other groups, maybe you want to focus on this one small high responsive group. But a lot of people are concerned not just about the response rate, but about the overall number of responses. And so they're willing to accept a lower response rate with a much larger group. It's the smaller slice of a much bigger pie.
Yeah. You're always figuring those things out. And I think for my clients, what I always say is figure out where your audience is and go stand there with them. You can't drag all of them over to where you are. You have to go to where they are and try and get them to see what you see. And that work has to be done over and over and over again, and then over and over and over again after that.
And, that actually brings up, I think, probably one of the most important things that you mentioned is the need for repetition.
Yeah.
People aren't paying attention. Say it more than once. What is it? Strunk and white. Mm-hmm. And it's like be concise, be concise. Giving the moral 3 times in a row. I don't think that was the actual phrase, but repeated it 3 times.
Yeah. So figuring out where your people are. So let's recognize that people don't perceive things the way you perceive things. Let's see if we can find out what they perceive. Let's notice how people are responding to the reality that we're presenting to them. And let's repeat what we see, bearing in mind all the context and obstacles and emotional barriers they might have to the truth. And then let's do it over and over again. And that's it. I mean, simple but not easy.
Yep. And with that, our time is up. And I just want to remind people that about as soon as I click end, the video will be available on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on YouTube, where you can watch it at your leisure, probably when it's not 3 a.m. for you where you are, and you can share it with others. And with that, folks, thank you so much for joining us. And Lisa, thanks for joining me again today.
It was a pleasure. Bye, everybody.